Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about the Week 15 waiver wire targets for the fantasy football season. So, for Week 15, many of you are in the Final Fours of your fantasy playoffs. Many of you may just be beginning your fantasy playoffs, but either way, there are a lot of players with a good amount of value going forward that I'm going to be mentioning at the running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, and even defensive pickup positions. Other than that, that's pretty much it. We're going to go over waiver wire, and we'll see where that takes us, shall we? All right. Hey, everybody. How's it going? All right. So I could literally sit here right now. I'm thinking off the top of my head. I could literally sit here for the next 35 minutes and rant on how bad some of the guys were this past week. I mean, just last night's game, right? What a travesty. The Rams and the Chicago Bears, both just useless. Tariq Cohen comes off a 30-point week, and then he ends up, Jared Goff shows up and throws 4 interceptions. What in the world took place this past week? I mean, I guess it's kind of becoming more of a, I don't know. It's more common, I guess, now that players are just not showing up and they're not performing. I was literally just watching the Seahawks versus Viking game at halftime. We're 3-0. We have Thielen, Diggs, Lockett, Russell Wilson, Dalvin Cook, Chris Carson in that game. Yet we have no scores. It's insane. All right, but as I mentioned, I'm not going to rant for 40 minutes. Let's talk about helping lineups get to the fantasy championships and help you guys pick up wins for Week 15. All right, to begin, we're going to start with the running back position for the waiver wire. And number one, it's obvious, right? If your league has Derrick Henry sitting on the waivers, I mean, you have to pick him up. Coming off of such a fantastic performance, it's only just a momentum boost for him and the Titans. They're still trying to make the playoffs, and they're going to continue to try to feed Derrick Henry the ball. This coming week, they play against the Giants. And the Giants, you've heard me talk about the Giants' defensive front and how bad they are against the run. Since losing their nose tackle, Snacks Harrison, they gave up, 3 100-yard rushers with Adrian Peterson, Matt Breida, and Peyton Barber just in the last 4 weeks. This past week against the Redskins, a little different because of the fact that the offense for the Redskins wasn't moving at all, and Adrian Peterson really wasn't able to get anything going. Had 10 carries for 16 yards or something like that. But either way, I think Derrick Henry this coming week, if you need a running back, you're still dealing with the James Conner injury, still have a gaping hole due to the fact that Kareem Hunt is done, or perhaps something else comes up and you'd rather play him in the matchup. He is a good pickup, and I believe going into this week, it could be a pretty good sneaky play against the Giants. Now, moving on to the number 2 running back, we have Ito Smith. Now, this is mainly because of the fact that Tevin Coleman, he's off the radar. He hasn't shown up in weeks. And because of that, the Falcons, Tevin Coleman, this is the end of his contract with the Falcons. They can decide to re-sign him, but chances are with Ito Smith and Devontae Freeman, there is a good chance that they don't sign Tevin Coleman back. It may cost them a pretty penny. And I'm not sure if they're willing to go ahead and make that commitment to Tevin Coleman off of the last couple performances we've seen from him. This past week, Ito Smith played against the Packers. He had 11 carries for 60 yards, about 9 fantasy points in half-point PPR scoring formats. And I think going forward, they're going to feature him more. To be honest, he's a rookie. Their season is down the drain. They're not playing for any playoff implications. So they're playing upset special. And why not give the rookie running back more reps as we go into the end of the season and into the 2019 season? So I expect them to give Ito Smith the ball more. And I expect him to be good fantasy-wise. We've seen him be relevant at times. We've seen him be a good goal line back. Hopefully they can continue to give him carries as such and start to implement him more. This coming week against the Arizona Cardinals is a team that gives up a lot of points to the running back position. So Ito Smith could be a good pickup. All right, moving on to number 3, Frank Gore. Goodness, I'm sure all of you have seen it. But if you haven't, okay, somehow you were busy yesterday and you weren't able to see the miracle play at the end of the game for the Dolphins. Please go watch that. But either way, okay, the running backs for the Dolphins yesterday completely tore apart the Patriots. Frank Gore looked like he was 25 years old. Kenyon Drake on the last play of the game won them the game. Brandon Bolden, a guy that, goodness gracious, I haven't heard his name in a hot minute. Like literally, I don't think I've heard his name for 2 years. Shows up and has 2 rushing touchdowns against the Patriots. The running backs were looking clean. But of the available, I'm sure Kenyon Drake is gone in your league. Brandon Bolden is not a guy you should be picking up. But Frank Gore, if he's available, he's still looking good. He's still moving the ball. And goodness, even against tough matchups, he somehow manages to find a way to be fantasy relevant. I remember a couple weeks back or earlier on in this season. Let me go find these stats for. Here we go. This just reading some stats. This week, 12 rushes for 92 yards. A couple weeks back, 67 yards on 14 carries, 90 yards, 50 yards, 50 yards, 101 yards, 63 yards. This guy can do it. Yes, a lot of his fantasy production is purely dictated on the ground, but in a standard league, it's not a bad play if you're really thin. Either way, we're moving on to the 4th running back I wanted to suggest for you guys. Elijah McGuire, finally Elijah McGuire showed up. Now, my only concern with the Elijah McGuire situation is that perhaps playing against the Houston Texans this coming week, that might not be a good matchup. But then again, you never know. If he gets hot, they're going to be behind a majority of the game, the Jets. So Elijah McGuire has a lot of opportunities in the passing game to find relevance. And I think if he is used efficiently and given the amount of carries he was given, if I'm not mistaken, this week he touched the ball more than he had all season long. Let's go ahead and pull this up. Thank you. 17 rushing attempts. Just that alone is something we need to just open our eyes to. When somebody's getting 17 rushing attempts, had 16 fantasy points, had a rushing touchdown, that is something that we can't sleep on. I mentioned him in the past. He obviously did not come to fruition, but finally they gave him the ball. They started to get him more involved within this offense since Sam Bradford has come back this past week, and hopefully that can sustain and continue. He's my number 4 suggestion at the running back position. Number 5, we have Zach Zenner, the running back of the Detroit Lions. Now, Kerryon Johnson, I'm not sure if he's coming back. To be honest, the injury may just be season-ending. Not to per se that he's going to have surgery or something, but assuming they want to keep their rookie running back healthy, they don't want to risk any sort of injury taking place. And to be honest, they're not playing for much as of right now. So I'm thinking if Zach Zenner continues to get the carries he just got this past week, he could be decent. We've seen him be good in this backfield at times, right? He is a stockier, big fullback-looking running back. But speaking of fullbacks, I hate you, James Devlin. I hate you so much. Anyway, either way, speaking of Zach Zenner, could be a decent play. But then again, we're looking thin at the running back position, guys. So I don't know. Either way, let's talk about number 6. I think Kenneth Dixon he's definitely a better option than Zach Zenner. He's still on the list. He's my 6th suggestion for this week. Kenneth Dixon is going to see more work in the backfield for the Ravens. Now, why do I say this? I literally read a report from an interview this morning. John Harbaugh, the head coach of the Ravens, had said, yes, Gus Edwards has been good for us, but he's been battling with some injuries. We are going to get Kenneth Dixon more carries as the season progresses. All right. That's good to know. Now, that's not to say that Gus Edwards is completely eliminated from this offense. He still had 16 carries last week. But Kenneth Dixon is a guy that is going to be used within this offense. He had a rushing touchdown this past week. And here's the thing. The Ravens' offense is pretty much fully a run team. They're a run team. They want to kill clock, and they want to keep their defense just taking over people, and they want to win on special teams. Now, if they can do those 3 things, run the ball, play good defense, and dominate special teams, they can be successful, right? We saw them compete with the Kansas City Chiefs yesterday and almost beat the Chiefs, even with Lamar Jackson going out in the 4th quarter. Now, here's the thing. Kenneth Dixon, Gus Edwards, Ty Montgomery, they're all 3 of them are relevant in fantasy right now. And I think going forward, it's not bad to own one of these guys. All right, moving on. Let's go talk about the wide receiver position for this coming week in the waiver wire discussions. Number one, it's Kenny Stills. My goodness. Who would have guessed that Kenny Stills was going to show up and have himself a 25-point fantasy week? Goodness gracious. Well, it's just fantasy football. Had a great game. And I think going forward, I mean, he had a good week prior to this week. But the question is, okay, is it sustainable? Can their offense continue to be decent? Or are they going to completely get shut out? You never know. But the week prior to this, he had 4 catches for 37 and a touchdown. And then this week, doubled it up, 8 catches, 135 and a touchdown. 23.5 fantasy points in half-point PPR scoring formats. Looked great. And to be honest, going into the next couple weeks, they are definitely tougher matchups. But I wanted to suggest him just in case those of you who are considering playing him. He plays against Minnesota, Jacksonville, and Buffalo in the next couple weeks. And those receivers are good. Now, I mean, those corners are good. But here's the thing. He does play in the slot. He plays on the outside a little bit here and there because of his speed. But then again, Danny Amendola is going to be in the slot. We'll see. It's a good option if you're thin. But then again, there are other names available. That's why I'm suggesting everybody. Number 2, Dante Pettis. If you haven't picked him up, I've been mentioning him for the last 2 weeks. He somehow found an end zone touchdown this week. Congratulations to you, Pettis. That is, 3 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks? Great. You play against Seattle again. You had a great game against them a couple weeks back. And hopefully you can end up having a good week of fantasy. He's my number 2 suggestion. Number 3, Kelvin Benjamin. Now, I didn't get time to talk about this earlier last week. Kelvin Benjamin was cut by the Buffalo Bills and signed to the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, he did not play this past Sunday because they had just signed him. They're getting him implemented within the offense, getting him the playbook, getting him ready so that if and when he has an opportunity, he knows the offense, he can play. There's an opportunity that perhaps this week Kelvin Benjamin will be ready to play. It's a short week, Thursday night game. And to be honest, with Sammy Watkins still bugged by an injury, there's a good chance that Kelvin Benjamin can be used within this offense. He's a big target. And honestly, the way Patrick Mahomes is playing, I think Kelvin Benjamin could be a good option. He's my number 3 suggestion. Moving on to number 4 and 5. We have Tim Patrick and DaeSean Hamilton. Now, these are 2 wide receivers for the Denver Broncos. And both of them, to be honest, continue to get a lot of targets. A lot of targets as in, 9, 10 targets apiece. Comparatively to like Courtland Sutton, who really did nothing this past week, Courtland Sutton looked terrible. And Tim Patrick, DaeSean Hamilton, they look like 2 up-and-coming receivers that were fantasy relevant. They had a good amount of catches apiece. They had a good amount of yardage, great target counts, And I think going forward, it's really going to depend on who gets the starting call per se. Who's getting more of the snap count, who's getting involved more within the offense, on who you should be picking up. But as of right now, they're both pretty much flyers. You could potentially pick one up and play them depending on the matchup. I mean, they play against the Cleveland Browns this week, so it's not a terrible matchup. All right, moving on to number 6, Robert Foster. Just when you think Zay Jones is going to have a breakout week, we have Robert Foster coming back. In the last 4 weeks, in the last month of the fantasy football season, Robert Foster has been a pretty decently low-key wide receiver. He's a guy that, for those of you looking for a boom or bust player, he is that. Like, he is a quick speedster that is going to take the top off the defense. And I think going forward, yes, the matchups are a little bit difficult, but to be honest, they're not killer. The way that the Bills are playing offensively and Josh Allen slinging it and running the ball, playing against Detroit, New England, and Miami in the next 3 weeks could be good, because in the last 4 weeks, Robert Foster's posted points in half-point PPR such as 12 points, 16.4, 3 points, which was the worst possible week he could have had, and 13.9. So he's looked good as of late. 3 games of 12 points or more in the last 4 weeks. And the next couple matchups are not terrible. So I like him as an option playing against the Lions. Could find himself some fantasy value. Moving on to my last suggestion. It's pretty much, we're thin. I'm telling you guys, we are thin at the wide receiver position. And Dede Westbrook somehow manages to find himself some fantasy value. If you are considering another wide receiver on the offense, it is definitely Dante Moncrief. Continues to get a lot of targets with Cody Kessler. I guess they have sort of a thing going. a little bit of rapport, so we'll see. But Dante Moncrief's not a bad option either. But then again, I'm telling you, we're thin at the position. Let's move on to the quarterback position, who I just mentioned a little bit while ago. Josh Allen of the Bills. Goodness, man. I think I was watching Thursday Night Football in the first quarter, and what happened was, I think ESPN said something like Josh Allen, having ran for 325 yards plus in the last 3 weeks, has had the most rushing yards in 3 back-to-back games for a quarterback. He broke Michael Vick's record by a substantial amount. So Josh Allen, man, somehow manages to find himself finding value with his legs. You would think Lamar Jackson would be running the ball this much. Nah, it's Josh Allen, the guy that it's mind-boggling. But either way, plays the Lions this week, could have a good matchup, and could find himself some fantasy value. He's been doing it the last couple weeks, and I think you can you might be able to play him. But then again, if you're really that thin at quarterback, it's unfortunate. Moving on to number 2, Ryan Tannehill. Had another great week. This is 2 weeks in a row where he's come back healthy. He's looked good, even with the running game of the Miami Dolphins dominating majority of the fantasy points in that lineup. That last play of the game, that Hail Mary, definitely boosted his stats a little bit, gave him a 10-point swing there at the end, but still prior to that, was a decent quarterback this week in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues. If I'm not mistaken, about 30 points. So this coming week against the Vikings, I understand it's a tough matchup, but you never know. Could end up finding himself some value. Moving on to number 3, Derek Carr and the Raiders. How did the Steelers lose to the Raiders? Why didn't Ben Roethlisberger come back into the game? He left the game due to that rib injury or whatever they wanted to call it. He came back to the sideline and didn't go back into the game until the second to last drive for that offense. Goodness. Either way, Derek Carr is who we're talking about. Last couple weeks, he's been good fantasy-wise. Plays against the Bengals this week. Could find himself having some good value. The Bengals, they're giving up some of them. I think they're giving up the third most points to the quarterback position on a weekly basis. So could be a good matchup for him if you're struggling at the quarterback. Moving on, Nick Mullens versus the Seahawks. Last time he played against Seahawks, had 400 yards passing. Could be similar. And Eli Manning versus the Titans. He looked really good this past week, but that was without Odell and against a very bad team. But again, we are very thin at the quarterback position. If you have to scrounge, please go for these top-tier guys like Allen and Tannehill, and try to maybe even Mullens, and try to stay away from the Elis of the world. All right, let's move on to the tight end position. As we get through this pretty quickly, we're talking about, okay, so really quickly, just like I mentioned Eli Manning, with Odell Beckham out, which we weren't able to mention last week because it was a late, I think it was on either Friday or Saturday that the injury news came out that he was going to be out with a quad injury. If he continues to be out, yes, Sterling Shepard is a good play per se, but again, I don't trust Eli enough to where I would fully commit to it, but it's not a bad play. Now, speaking of other options within offense, Evan Engram becomes a viable option. We saw him last season be, fantasy relevant because of the fact that Odell Beckham and Sterling Shepard were out for majority of that season, and there wasn't anybody else to throw the ball to. Now that you have Saquon in that team, yes, there's another option there, but Evan Engram should be used within this offense in the next couple weeks. Hopefully, we'll see him get implemented more and more, and if he's available, he should be picked up if you need a tight end. Moving on to number 2, Ian Thomas, the backup for Greg Olsen. I mentioned him this past week, and ended up having a good game, 77 receiving yards on about a handful of catches. Looked decent, and to be honest, he's going to continue to be good. Yes, he plays against the Saints, but if you're really struggling, you got to play the tight end. Now, I did mention this past week, I literally have been quoted to being said, hey, Cameron Brate is a sketchy play. I had him at number 12 or 11 in my tight end ranking. He's a sketchy play because the Saints, they don't give up any yards, they don't give up any points to the tight end. Dude ended up catching 2 balls, 2 touchdowns for 14 yards. Goody me. Moving on to Blake Jarwin of the Dallas Cowboys. Looked good this past week. 7 catches, 7 targets, 7 receptions, 50-some odd yards. The best the tight end has looked for the Cowboys since Jason Witten was in the building. So could be good moving forward. Moving on to number 4, Anthony Firkser. Here's the thing about him. Jonnu Smith got hurt this past week. And to be honest, that's 2 weeks in a row he's looked decent at the tight end position. And I think going forward, he doesn't play the Jaguars this week. They play against the Giants. That is a mistake. He played the Jaguars last week. I literally mentioned him last week as a decent option, and the graphic is still up there. So be it. Either way, he plays the Giants this week. Now, who really plays the Jaguars this week? It's Vernon Davis and the Redskins. The quarterback will be Josh Johnson, if I'm not mistaken. Had a pretty decent week, but I don't think he's going to be able to sustain that. Vernon Davis will be taking place of Jordan Reed, who is injured. He's a little banged up as of right now, so there's a good chance that Vernon Davis finds himself some fantasy value this week in a I wouldn't say easier matchup, but to be honest, those Jaguars giving up a lot of points this past week, and they could continue to do so going forward. All right, let's talk about the defensive waiver wire targets before we get out of here. Number 1, it's the Seahawks for sure. I've been mentioning this for the last month. They play the 49ers twice within 3 weeks, right? And tonight, they're not having a bad defense tonight. Last time I checked, they didn't give any points up to the Vikings. Could have changed. Let's see. Has it changed? Shall we check? Curiosity killed the cat. I don't know. We'll see. Yep, it is still 6-0. So that being said, Seahawks still looking good defensively. Moving on to number 2, we have the Saints versus against the Panthers. I don't care. The Panthers have looked terrible as of late. They have lost 5 in a row, and the Saints defensively, they are playing well. They are averaging, they're giving up only 13 points per game. This defense has turned over a new leaf, and they're continuing to be great. They need to be picked up if they're not ASAP. Tennessee Titans, another good team that has had 3 good back-to-back matchups. They played against the Jets. They played against the Jaguars. Now they go against the Giants. Should be another good matchup for them defensively. Moving on to number 4, the Detroit Lions versus the Bills. Now, if Josh Allen shows up and starts throwing interceptions, there's a potential that the Lions end up being good. They gave Josh Rosen a lot of trouble. They destroyed the Cardinals, only allowing them 3 points. Yes, it wasn't a big margin of victory, only a 14-point win, but it had to do a lot with Matthew Stafford being useless and the Lions defense carrying that team this past week. Moving on to the last defense I wanted to mention, the Cowboys don't play the Eagles, Andrew. The Cowboys play against the Colts, and I don't even know why they're on the graphic. We're not going to even mention that. We're just going to say that was a mess up. Just go with the 4 top targets, okay? Other than that, I'm not sure what's available on your rosters, but or on your waivers, but that seems like the best possible plays going into this coming week. Potentially, you know what? The Buffalo Bills defense versus the Lions. That is a good play. The Buffalo Bills defense playing against the Lions. Matthew Stafford was terrible this past week. He's been awful this entire season. I'm pretty sure he's being outscored by Eli Manning in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues. It is how the legends have fallen, right? Insane. A guy that's so good in fantasy, just irrelevant now. Anyway, that's basically it. It's a quick video. I just wanted to, go over a couple things really quickly. Yes, I have said multiple times, if you play in a Week 17 championship game, I feel bad, but it doesn't matter. I'm still going to be putting out content in Week 17. I will still have these waiver wire videos. I will still have the ranking videos in Week 17. You do not have to worry. I know many of you asked me that this past week. Are we still going to get videos in Week 17, even though you don't believe in that kind of stuff? Yes, there will still be videos. Other than that, it's pretty much it. Off the top of my head, what can I think of? I'm looking at the screen. I'm thinking, the person, many of you asked, okay, you went down to the comment section. You asked for a guy with the initials of JL, okay? And you said, where is that guy on the rankings list? We don't talk about him, okay? And since we have stopped talking about him in the last 2 weeks, he who shall not be named has been fantastic in fantasy. So hopefully he'll continue to help our fantasy teams since we've been carrying his bum ass on our bench. Either way, that's basically it. Tomorrow, running backs, and hope everybody has a good game tonight. Hopefully you guys pick up W's. Doesn't look like it's much scoring, but either way, thank you everybody for watching, and until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.